Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let's talk about North Korea. North Korea recently did another missile test. Now these missile tests are comically ridiculous from the standpoint that oftentimes those tests completely fail. They end up in the water somewhere. They're not comically ridiculous from the standpoint of how they're perceived around the world and the lunatics that we have at the helm of our government perceiving those things. Meaning, North Korea is a sovereign country, can do whatever the hell it wants. If they want to have a missile test, they can have a missile test. If the United States wants to have a missile test, the United States has a missile test. It's insane for the United States to look across at another country and say, you don't have the right, or you don't have the capability, you don't have the right as a sovereign country to make the determination to do a missile test. So let's first bake that into the cake. The second part to this, though, that's even more ridiculous. This is ego. This is purely ego. Like, you need to understand what I mean. This is not, we're in this process to make sure that these guys don't hurt anybody. If that was your goal, you'll behave completely different than what you're behaving. What you're doing is trying to alpha male another country. You're looking at that country and essentially saying, yes, we don't have just cause to tell you not to do a missile test, but we're telling you not to do a missile test. We have appointed ourselves the policemen of the world. And as policemen of the world, we're watching you, North Korea. Now, yes, North Korea is being threatening. Yes, North Korea is saber-rattling, but so is the United States. The United States is also saber-rattling. We rushed the ship over to that particular country. Trump has been threatening them with a war, literally. That's not hyperbole. He's literally been... They asked him, do you think there'll be a war with North Korea? He's like, we have to see what happens. We have to see what happens. Going so far, I mean, literally going so far as to make this case of pushing China to put additional pressure on North Korea to behave. Now, that's not a horrible idea, but you got to understand, part of the way they're trying to incentivize China to do this is by giving this impression that Donald Trump is crazy enough to attack North Korea. I admit that North Korea could be a problem, but do you honestly believe that antagonizing another country that has an incentive, understand, as a leader of a country, your incentive is to be strong, period. Even being wrong, you must be strong. People will support you, believe it or not, if you're wrong, but at the same token, you're strong in being wrong. It's one of the reasons why Democrats are so ridiculous. They take positions, but they're so weak, they just crumble the moment anybody's gaze falls on them. The point I'm getting at is, Kim Jong-un is a dictator of that particular country. No, he's not going to bow down, quote unquote, to United States pushes because he's not incentivized to bow down. He's incentivized to do the opposite by his particular culture and by the people who have him in that particular position. So right off the bat, you've left no escape route. You've essentially started to escalate with this other country. From the United States standpoint, what are you going to do? Are you going to let it pass? Like, so he's did a missile strike. What are you going to do? Are you going to attack North Korea? Part of the reason why China is so adamant in trying to incentivize North Korea to say, dude, we need you to calm down, is because China, to some degree, understands, or at the very least, they get that Trump is stupid enough to do it. Trump is stupid enough to do it. Are there other ways of doing it? Yes. But his concern is not those other ways. His concern is, how do I alpha male this other country? That is purely a sense of ego. And it's not even a good sense of ego. Because ultimately, that particular country, if you end up attacking that country is not necessarily going to attack you. No, North Korea can't put a missile on our shores. They're ridiculous in regards to technology. Can they put a missile on South Korea? Yeah. Can they put a missile on Japan? Yes. Yes, they can. Meaning, if Trump is doing this purely because he's saying he wants to make sure that the countries in that particular region are safe, he's pursuing an action that is the worst course of action possible for the safety and security of those countries involved. This is purely ego. This is purely ego. I'm a cartoon show host, reality billionaire, and ultimately, I've become president in some way. And because I now have this powerful trillion-dollar military with a bunch of people who, for the most part, believes they're doing the right thing, even though they're not, they're hurting people abroad, I'm going to use this to try to change the dynamics around the globe. Doing so, starting with North Korea. Is North Korea a problem? Maybe. But understand, you have to admit, how Obama handled North Korea versus how Trump is handling North Korea are drastically different. And in one case, the possibility of a war was not even mentioned because it wasn't necessary to mention it. In this particular case, he is directly antagonizing another country, and he's essentially saber-rattling and flinging his gonads around in front of that country. Look, here's the thing. In politics, you're not free to do whatever you want. You're just not. There's certain things where you are caught with political pressure, meaning the government that you may be accountable to, their social structure, whatever that social structure is, those people in that can push a particular way. Whether those people are pushing you in a particular way that's good or bad, that doesn't necessarily matter. Ultimately, they're pushing you a particular way, meaning you have to go with a particular current. Back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a situation where Khrushchev he thought that JFK he thought he was weak, if we're being honest. He thought he was a pushover. And he thought that he could do some of the similar shit that Trump is doing now and alpha male another country. Well, of course, that's not going to work. Regardless of what JFK was thinking, there is no way that the people around him in the power structure in America would have allowed him, politically, to be weak in the situation. It has nothing to do with the individual. It has to do with the forces that are acting on that particular individual in that particular country. What I'm getting at is you can create situations that are intractable and inescapable just because the incentives command those things up until a certain point. Meaning, if I get you to A, just built into A are the prerequisites for B, which gets you there. There's no way, they're inextricably linked, meaning it's almost like going through the event horizon of sorts. Just based on the politics of a particular country and the dynamics of a particular situation, XYZ becomes inevitable after a particular act. It's like a forced mate. It's like saying, this is made in 10. Well, yeah, you may not see made in 10, but it's made in 10 just because of the way the events are going to unfold based upon a particular action. If you're setting those pieces up in a way that could end you up into a war, you could end up into a war. Whether or not Trump is intentionally trying to do this or not, whether or not he's trying to pretend to be batshit crazy or not, is irrelevant. You can still end up in a war based on political posturing. And we need to talk about one other aspect of this. It doesn't in any way take into consideration perspective of the other country. Meaning, think back to Vietnam. The United States takes over for France, a subjugated nation. France essentially subjugated Vietnam for decades. The United States takes over. The United States never at once took the Vietnamese perspective, nor are we going to allow another foreign democracy to take over our country. Well, the United States had no clue that that's the way they were viewing that situation. The United States looked at it as this kind of Cold War politics of, moving pieces around the board of sorts. These guys were looking at it from a standpoint of, we've suffered through this particular occupation, we're not going to suffer through another occupation. Robert McNamara talks about this, where he talked to Ho Chi Minh and had the conversation with him and realized that millions of people died from a fundamental misunderstanding, from just a cultural perspective thing. Neither side wanted to understand the perspective of the other side. And in that case, again, the United States was the aggressor. Well, same situation. At no point in this conversation how does North Korea see this particular situation? We always cartoon that government. We always make it look like there's some kind of two-dimensional figure. These caricatures of sorts. What if they're not caricatures? What if those are actual people? What if they're flesh and blood? What if they have certain biases and certain things that they care about? That doesn't fit into the model of a cartoon. We were at war with North Korea. And I need to disappoint you. It's almost as if most Americans are kind of in the dark on this stuff. Just because America's in the dark on the behavior of America around the world doesn't mean other countries that have been on the bad end of the shit that we've done is unaware of those bad things. Meaning the antagonism that you get from certain countries are from things that you yourself as a country did to that country. North Korea is one of those countries. North Korea, yes, it started a war. The United States carpet bombed them for 3 years. If I'm not mistaken, we killed 20% of their population. Can you fathom that? Like that's an amazing thing. The bombing rates took no account for civilians, no account for anything else. It was just bombing. We dropped more bombs on North Korea than we did in Japan in World War II. Napalm, traditional bombs. That is an amazing thing. Now, yes, you're looking through that lens. You see those troops are still there on your border. Understand, those troops, that war never ended. Ultimately, it just ended in an armistice. Technically, they're still at war. So you have a situation where American troops are still sitting right there on the border of a country, and those troops in the past, 50, 60 years ago, killed 20% of your population. What is the perspective of the individual in that particular population seeing that? And in addition to seeing that, also seeing America get put into situations of sending ships, literally threatening language, saber rattling. I would wager to you, I would strongly wager to you, that they're looking at a nuclear weapon as a deterrent. They're not looking at it as a weapon of sorts. They full well understand that the United States doesn't attack countries that have a nuclear weapon. That's the balancer. That's the thing that says, all right, we're going to put pain on you if you attack us. Yes, you can kick our ass with a conventional weapon. No, if we have a nuclear bomb and we can get that off, you're going to hurt. They understand that. Every country understands that, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea. When the United States considers them a hostile government, those countries are terrified. You already have a political history, a historical record of them murdering 20% of your population. They still have troops on the border, and you have a belligerent president who's literally putting a spotlight on you, where that spotlight wasn't necessarily there over the previous administrations, meaning this is an aggressive spotlight just for the sake of it being a spotlight, not because anything is tangibly changed. This is ego. There's no reality to this. This is some shit that Trump is making up in his head. You see that. Why wouldn't you try to find something that can save your ass enough, friend? Meaning, yes, you would try to find or use your resources, the meager resources that you have to create some kind of bomb or some kind of armament. So yeah, their behavior is not cartoonish. Their behavior makes perfect sense, left with the situation in which they find themselves. If you believe your country, Americans were saying that Obamacare was essentially government takeover and these guys went running to one place after another to protest. Yeah, how would they behave if you really thought that foreign troops were going to land on your soil? Foreign troops are already at your border, no less. I suggest that the reason why North Korea is behaving the way North Korea is because we're pressuring North Korea to behave in a particular way. And I also suggest that any attack on North Korea is essentially going to put your own allies, Japan and South Korea, in jeopardy the moment that you're attacked. Meaning there is no situation, yes, you can beat the hell out of North Korea. You can kick a puppy, that's great. But they're still going to hurt your interests. If the reason that you're saying that you're doing this is to protect your interests abroad, and the things that you're doing are going to hurt that interest, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Again, the reason why I say it doesn't make sense, this is ego. This is ego. Nothing has changed. This is some shit he's making up as he goes along. So keep an eye on your government. And I bring up this point a lot, only in the sense of put yourself in other people's places. Like, I try to get myself so thoroughly into the position of the other person that I can feel the feelings associated with that other person. That doesn't necessarily always work, and yeah, that's going to be still extremely subjective, at least from my standpoint. But it gets you further in the sense of trying to understand the motives and the reasons why people are doing things. And oftentimes I find that if their motives are clean, and I don't necessarily like something they're doing, I can at the very least empathize with it, even though I may necessarily oppose it. In this particular case, they're talking about killing a lot of people. And they're talking about killing a lot of people for issues of ego without a reality to it, based purely from the things that we've been doing around the world and the perception of that particular country, which is a good and right perception of this particular country's ability to create mayhem and destruction. And just, if we've been honest, a willful ignorance in regard, or a willful belligerence in regards to ignoring international law. So yes, that country is behaving in the way you would expect that country to behave, particularly when that country is not taking this tact of, we're going to go with our tail between our legs, because I don't know any country that would go with their tail between their legs. So yeah, so I'll leave it here. Alright guys, if you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon.